Thank you for joining us today, everybody. My name is Matt Evans. I'm a GIS specialist with the State of Indiana's Geographic Information Office, and I'm excited to welcome you to the 2026 Data Harvest Kickoff webinar. Just some housekeeping items before we get started. Your microphones are muted by default, so feel free to put any questions that you have in the chat, and I will address those at the end of the meeting. And I would note, like I mentioned, that this meeting is being recorded so that we can share with anybody that wasn't able to make it today. So to start us here, just have a brief agenda that will cover what we will talk about during the webinar here. So give a brief overview of the program and some of the ways that the data is being used at the statewide level. I will cover the timeline for the data collection process, as well as the data release of the statewide data products later this year. We'll go over the data submission and upload process from the county governments to the state of Indiana, and then I will go over some specific details about the schema and highlight a couple of the specific data sets that we're looking to obtain from more counties as we do the project this year. So to start, just at a high level, the Data Harvest Program is our local government data collection and data improvement project. We work with all 92 of Indiana's counties to collect this, what we call framework GIS data. So this includes address points, road center lines, parcel boundaries, and then a series of different governmental or administrative boundaries. These data sets are widely used at the statewide level. They feed into the IndianaMap and are some of the most widely used data sets, I think specifically the parcels on the IndianaMap open data platform. They will be critical for Next Generation 911, which is being rolled out across the state by Next Gen core service providers, which are AT&T and Digital. The GIS data in Next Gen 911 is used for routing 911 calls to the appropriate public safety answering point or 911 dispatch center for routing emergency services to a given location. They are also widely used by various state agencies for their business needs. For example, DNR and IDEM use this data a lot, the parcel data, as well as some of the other administrative boundary data sets that we collect. The other one important thing to note as well is we do feed this data up to the national level, to the U.S. Department of Transportation's National Address Database. So this data is starting to be fed into some national and federal level initiatives for part of the National Spatial Data Infrastructure. And then we also create statewide geocoders with this data. So these geocoders are free to use and use authoritative data maintained at the local level to convert a civic address location to a point on a map that then can be analyzed, and all sorts of different kind of things can be done with it. So we appreciate the work that all of the data stewards across Indiana put into this project and are looking to continue to make this project a success. Just for a brief timeline for the program this year, we will officially open the data harvest for submissions on July 31st of this year. So that's the final Friday before the month of August starts. We will close those data submissions on August 31st, which is the final Friday of August. We are hoping to get the parcel data published first, which will be in late October of this year. Looking at publishing the administrative or governmental boundaries in late November of this year. The road center lines will come next, approximately in mid-December, and then the address points will stretch into late January. And then once all that statewide data has been published and made available to the public, we will then create some metadata documentation that we post on our website, as well as create and update the statewide geocoders for public use. I would note that we've been doing a lot of work over the past couple of years to kind of streamline our data QC and data post-processing. So we are really hoping to kind of push these timelines forward and ideally get all the data published by the end of the year is kind of the goal moving forward. But these are more kind of conservative estimate for when we plan to have all of the data available to the public. And just wanted to talk briefly about some of our priorities for 2026. We were happy and very excited to receive incorporated municipality or incorporated area boundaries from all 92 counties in the 2025 data harvest for the first time. We'd really like that to continue so that we can update, annually an incorporated area data set for the open data site, and would really like to receive this data from all 92 counties again this year. And then as we've been starting to partner more and more with the Indiana 911 Board, who's responsible for the statewide 911 infrastructure, as well as the Next Generation 911 project, We would really like to start collecting more next-gen 911 boundaries from as many counties as possible. So this includes a couple of different data sets, or a few different data sets, which I'll briefly go over. This includes PSAP boundaries, which represent the extent of a public safety answering point, or again, a 911 dispatch center's responsibility for routing 911 calls and emergency services. Provisioning boundaries, which represent the extent of the area of a GIS data provider's responsibility for providing data to those next generation 911 systems. And then 3 different emergency service boundaries that are split out into individual data sets. So this includes EMS boundaries for emergency medical service areas, fire boundaries for fire department response areas, and then police boundaries for police or law enforcement response areas. And all of these 911 boundaries, I have a few slides at the end of the presentation that will go into a little bit more detail on what we're looking for and kind of how these data sets are represented in the GIS data. Also wanted to talk about our overall approach for the 2026 collection. Is those of you who are representing local governments here today know we have been working with 77 of Indiana's 92 counties on a grant project that we call the SEED grant. This is meant to supply some funding to local governments to convert their data to NENA's next generation 911 data model, as well as do some data quality control by validating that data and then remediating the data to pass certain validations and minimum passing scores. So for any county that has received a SEED grant, especially those that have an active project ongoing, if you have been uploading your data to VEP, which is the state's data aggregation and data validation platform, your latest upload to that platform will be accepted as a data harvest submission, so you won't need to submit it twice. But if your project, your performance period has been completed and the project is not ongoing anymore, we will be requesting new data to be uploaded to VEP. And if you are able and willing, a lot of counties were specifically working on certain data sets, for example, address points, road center lines, and street name aliases, but we're not working on other eligible data sets like incorporated areas, parcels, or other administrative boundaries. If you have other data that you are willing and able to share that were not part of your grant scope, we would encourage you to submit that up through VEP as well. For the other counties, almost all of the other counties in Indiana that did not receive a SEED grant, we would ask you to upload your data to VEP during that July 31st to August 31st month window. We, again, like we have in the past years, will be partnering with the Polis Center at IU Indianapolis for the data harvest, and they will be assisting with data processing for, I believe, 4 or 5 remaining counties that are not ready to be onboarded and submitted to VEP. And will also be assisting us with some data QC on the statewide data so that we can make any kind of adjustments needed and standardize things before we get it released out to the public. So to talk about the submission process for data that VEP can support, I wanted to note that VEP does support data submissions for the majority of data sets that we are asking for the data harvest. We do have a couple of optional data sets that are not supported by VEP, which include county commissioner districts, county council districts, which both represent the areas of where the county commissioners or the county council representatives, the populations that they represent, as well as taxing districts and TIF districts are not supported in VEP. So we do have another data upload process, which we've been utilizing in the past couple of years, that we will request anybody that has this data and is able to share it to submit it through that process. And if using VEP, as long as your field's data types and the lengths of those fields or the lengths of the values within those fields match, data that's in your native schema can be mapped into VEP, so you don't necessarily need to use the state's template geodatabase or shapefiles to upload that into the system. If you do use the state's template information, you can auto map a lot of your information into VEP. And I would also note that VEP does allow you to save a schema. So if you run an upload once and plan to upload it again in the future, you can import that saved schema into future uploads. I also briefly wanted to go over some reasons that might cause a data upload process to fail within VEP. These are a couple of primary issues, primarily being geometry issues. VEP uses FME's kind of ETL processes behind the scenes to do some data standardization and do the data validations. And that will require the features within the GIS data sets that you submit to be both OGC valid and OGC simple. And if any geometric issues, things like null geometry, maybe self-intersections are detected that are not compliant with those OGC rules, the data upload process will typically fail. I would encourage anybody that maybe hasn't submitted their data to VEP in a long time or is not sure that it might upload correctly to run the check geometry and repair geometry tools within ArcGIS Pro, specifically using the OGC method, or any other kind of geometry validation tools if you're using open source GIS software to maybe find and resolve those issues. Other issues that might cause the data upload process to fail would be a field type mismatch. So for example, if your address number within your address points is being maintained as a string or a text field, the NINA Next Generation 911 data model that we're using for the schema, that address number field is an integer data type. So if there's any of those kind of major field type mismatches, the data upload process might fail as well. And then if you have any field values that exceed the maximum length of the target field that you map it to within VEP, that data upload process may fail as well. So would encourage any of the data stewards, if you're uploading your data to VEP, like I mentioned earlier, if you haven't uploaded in a long time, to maybe run the upload pre-checks tool. That will check for any of those kind of critical errors that might prevent your data from uploading successfully before you attempt to commit your full upload to the system. For non-VEP supported data, once again, that's the county commissioner, county council districts, and then taxing districts and TIF districts. We will be updating the Survey 123 form that we've been using for the past couple of years. The screenshots on here show the 2024 survey. We'll be having all of this information resources updated within the next week before I eventually send out some of the kickoff emails to everybody across the state. I would encourage you to fill out that form and submit it over to us, and then we will follow up with a link where you can upload a zipped, geodatabase or series of shape files to a public SharePoint site, so that we can download it and aggregate it and kind of do some of that data standardization. And for a brief overview of what the schema is going to look like for this year, this is nearly identical to the schema that we used for the 2025 data harvest. The only difference between 2025 schema and this year's was we are not asking for library districts or school districts in the data harvest anymore, so no need to submit any of that information over to us. And similar to 2025, the schema is nearly identical to version 2 of NINA's Next Generation 911 GIS data model. This applies to most of the data sets that we collect through the data harvest program, excluding a few data sets that are not used in Next Gen 911 systems, which would be parcels, taxing districts, TIF districts, and then the county commissioner and county council districts. Really, the primary difference between the state's schema and the NINA schema, at least for the Next Generation 911 kind of supported data sets, is in the address point data, we have split the unit field, which is a single field in the NINA standard, into two fields, which are a unit type and unit ID. And I'll cover kind of examples for how those fields can be populated in an upcoming slide. And kind of the key considerations for what we're looking for this year, specifically as it relates to your civic location information, which would be things like your address points and your road center lines, would be to make sure that the street name elements are parsed into their appropriate fields as much as possible, and then to populate the place name elements to as much detail as possible. This kind of information is very important for the geocoding tools at the state, and would be very helpful to put some of that work in. Similar to previous years, we are offering template schema files, so that we will have a spreadsheet available to anybody to download that has a list of all of the fields, as well as a field alias, any domains that are applied to those fields, the field's data type, and field length. We will also have a template or kind of blank file geodatabase that you can download, as well as template shape files. We will be uploading these to the Data Harvest website in about a week on the submit page. So once I send out the kind of kickoff emails later in July, before the project kicks off on July 31st, these will be available for you to download, and I'll make sure to share links for those resources as well. And for a little bit more detail on what I was talking about with the street name parsing information and the place name elements, I have a couple of slides here that'll kind of walk through some more specific information about what we're looking for here. So the NINA data model contains 8 different street name components, which I'll briefly walk through. A few of these are rarely used. Some might be used more frequently. Starting from the top, this is the street name pre-modifier, which is a word or phrase that precedes the street name pre-directional, street name pre-type, or street name pre-type separator and is distinct from the official street name. Primary example that I think we've seen across the state when we receive the data from all of the counties is maybe Old, and example being Old and Old North Main Street. The street name pre-directional would be a directional value that's separated from the street name, example being North and North Keystone Avenue. The street name pre-type would be a street name type value that precedes the street name. So Interstate and Interstate 70. The primary examples for the street name pre-type that we see would be county roads, state roads, US highways, and interstates. The street name pre-type separator is another rarely used field. This is more commonly used in French and Spanish street names, but there are a few in English street names like in the or of the. So in the and circle in the woods is the example there. The street name is the official kind of name component within the full street name. So in South B Street, B would be considered the street name element. The street name post type would be the street name type that is following the street name field. So Court and Summer Lakes Court. The street name post directional, which would be a directional value following the street name, like West and 98th Place West. And then another rarely used field is the street name post modifier. One example might be Extension in Capitol Boulevard Extension. And then for the place name elements, we have a few different types of place names. So this includes legislative place names, which are place names related to a unit of government. So this includes things like the country field. In Indiana, this is pretty straightforward since we're not bordering Canada or Mexico, any other countries. So it would just be US for all features. The state value, which is pretty straightforward for the address point data, would just be Indiana. But for the road centerline data, which does have left and right fields for these different governmental kind of boundary information, could be the name of a neighboring state if a road is on the border with another state. County for the name of the county, pretty straightforward again for the address points, would just typically be the name of the county that the address is within. And then for the road center lines, if a road makes up the border of a county, might be on the left or right hand side of each road, the name of a neighboring county. And then the name of the incorporated municipality, if any, and if the address or either side of the road center line is within the unincorporated portions of the county, it could be populated with a value of unincorporated. There are also postal place names, which in many areas might be the same as municipality place names, but there might be some differences since these are used for mail delivery. These are also very important for the geocoding tools that we create at the state level and for all the state agency business needs associated with the geocoding tools. This includes the postal code, which is the 5-digit postal code or zip code associated with an address or either side of a road centerline feature. There's also a postal code extension for the zip+4 information in the address point data set. So if that's currently being tracked anywhere in Indiana, you can populate that in that field. But that primary 5-digit zip code is really the most important one for those geocoding tools that we have. And then the postal community name, which is the city or community name for mail delivery associated with each address. There are also some unofficial place names. These are both optional fields. These are not, a requirement within the schema, but this includes the name of an unincorporated community, whether that's an unincorporated area, within a county, or it could be the kind of scale of like a large neighborhood or something like that within an incorporated area. And then the neighborhood community, which is meant to be at a much kind of smaller scale, which would be like the name of a subdivision, shopping area, or something like that. So for a little bit of an example of how to parse a complete address into its individual components, including the street name components and kind of address number information, we have a sample address of 701/2 East Main Street, apartment 3A. In this case, 700 could be parsed into the address number. where the address number suffix would contain any other information associated with that address number that follows the address number. That would typically be most commonly populated with maybe fractional addresses like that half address, or other information like A, B, or C that immediately follows that address number. And then similar to the examples that I showed with the street name components, east would be the street name pre-directional, main would be the street name, and then street would be the street name post type. And then apartment could be moved into that unit type field that I mentioned earlier. And then 3A would be that unit identifier. So that could be text, could be a number, or could be a combination of the two, depending on how that subaddress has specifically been assigned. So for the 2026 data harvest, we're considering the following data sets as required, and this would be kind of the bare minimum of what we would ask for a data provider to send over to us. This includes data sets that we've worked a lot with in the past. Parcel boundaries is a polygon data set, address points, road center lines, and then incorporated municipality boundaries. Like I mentioned earlier, we were lucky to receive all 92 counties worth of incorporated areas last year, so we could update the statewide data for everywhere across the state. We would really like to continue to do that process and would greatly appreciate if you would be able to send us your incorporated area boundaries. As strongly recommended data sets, those that are not required, but that we would really like to start collecting more and more so that we can start to kind of evaluate them as cross-jurisdictionally to see how they line up across the state. This includes a lot of those next-gen 911 data sets that I mentioned earlier. So the PSAP boundaries, the extent of your public safety answering point responsibility or jurisdiction. The provisioning boundaries, which would represent the GIS data provisioning responsibility up to next generation 911 core services for eventual next gen 911 call routing. The 911 service boundaries, which include EMS boundaries, fire boundaries, and police or law enforcement boundaries. Street name aliases, which are a flat table that can be used to relate an alias for a street name from the road center line data set, which is very helpful for providing some additional flexibility within the geocoding tools, regardless of how a street name's entered. Unincorporated community boundaries, which I mentioned earlier, would look similar to how it does in the address points, just as a polygon data set. So it would be the extent of an unincorporated community in the unincorporated portions of the county, or a large neighborhood or other kind of named area within an incorporated area. And the neighborhood community boundaries, again, kind of the scale of a subdivision or shopping center that has a unique name and can be used to kind of relay addresses to where they fall within some of these unofficial place areas. And then for optional data sets, but we would, of course, always appreciate if we can receive these. I meant to move the unincorporated neighborhood community boundaries from the strongly recommended into the optional. My apologies. We do consider those as fully optional. In addition, these include those non-VEP data sets, which are the county commissioner districts, the county council districts, the taxing district boundaries, and the TIF district boundaries. As I mentioned earlier, I will spend a little bit of time here at the end of the presentation to go over some data set highlights to go into a little bit more detail on some of these next-gen 911 service boundaries. Starting with the PSAP boundaries, these represent the geographic coverage of a public safety answering point or 911 dispatch center jurisdiction. Across the state and across different jurisdictions, the intention here is that this data must not have unintentional gaps or overlaps, and these are a crucial component of next-gen 911 call routing. So when a 911 call is made, that it can be routed to the correct PSAP for eventual emergency service response kind of dispatch. These have a few fields that are primarily 911 specific, including a globally unique identifier, an identifier for the agency responsible, a display name for it, so the name of the public safety answering point, and then some specific next-gen 911 fields like the service URI, URN, and service number. We would also like, if possible, to start working with counties on collecting more provisioning boundaries so that we can evaluate how these line up across jurisdictions across Indiana. Similarly to the PSAP boundaries, also based on the NENA standard, because this is also critical for next-gen 911 and data discrepancy reporting, as well as making sure the data is submitted only within the provisioning boundary up to these next-generation 911 core services. These represent the GIS or the geographic coverage of GIS data provisioning or submission responsibility up to those Next-Gen 911 core services that power the kind of call routing mechanisms for the future of what 911 dispatch is going to look like. They might represent the extent of a county, a city, or maybe even a regional area. And we would encourage GIS data providers or GIS data stewards to work with their PSAP. And if you've started working with your Next-Gen 911 core service provider like AT&T to determine what your provisioning scenario is going to look like up to those systems. And similarly to the PSAP boundaries, these must not have any unintentional gaps or overlaps between different jurisdictions. So the intention here is if we can get closer to a statewide data set, we can start to validate this data to make sure that these gaps and overlaps do not exist, and then start to work with data stewards to create this more kind of seamless and consistent data set across the state as Next-Gen 911 projects continue to move forward in Indiana. And for the EMS, fire, and police boundaries, these all have the same schema and are meant to represent the geographic coverage or the extent of these emergency service agency response areas. Just like the provisioning and the PSAP boundaries, these must not have any unintentional gaps or overlaps. And similar to the other data sets, are also crucial for future Next-Gen 911 call routing. And share a very similar schema with the PSAP boundaries, where primarily 911 specific fields, that globally unique ID, agency identifier, and then some of the Next-Gen 911 kind of specific attributes. For the incorporated areas, also we have the schema for this based on the NENA Next-Gen 911 requirements. These represent the geographic coverage of a city or town, so a formally incorporated kind of government area. Also will be important for future 911 workflows, but also will be important for future taxpayer address validation workflows that are utilized by the BMV and Department of Revenue. These include some Next-Gen 911 specific fields, which include the date that the record was last updated and a globally unique ID. Also include some of those legislative place name elements that I was talking about with the address data. So the name of the county that the municipality is within, as well as the official name of the incorporated area or the municipality. And the other data set I wanted to highlight specifically is the street name alias table. Like I mentioned, this is maintained as a flat table that can be used to relate any aliases or other known names for a street from your road center lines to this table, and provides a lot of flexibility in the geocoding tools to match an address regardless of how a user is inputting that address. These are related to the road centerline dataset through the NGUID, which is the NENA Globally Unique Identifier. And these are especially maybe common within incorporated areas on US or state highways where that route or highway might have been renamed by the local addressing authority. So for example, on the graphic on the top of the screen there, you have State Route 23, which within one county is also known as County Route 59 and Avenue of the Pines. And within a city in that same county is also known as Veterans Memorial Highway and Main Street. The bottom screenshot on there shows kind of what the data model looks like here. You have a primary key, so an NGUID or global unique identifier for the alias street name, as well as a foreign NGUID, which would allow it to be related to the road centerline dataset. And then those same 8 street name components are included as an alias field within here. So it allows, again, that flexibility for an address to be matched to the road centerline dataset, regardless of if it's entered as County Route 59, Avenue of the Pines, or State Route 23 within the unincorporated portions of that county in the example on the top of the screen there. I also briefly wanted to go over a little bit of information on data validation in the VEP platform. For those of you that have received a seed grant and are working through your project, you're aware that the grant requires data stewards to address various validations for the different data sets. For those of you that do not have a grant, if you are able and willing, we always appreciate any work that can be done to take a look at these validations, maybe pass that feedback on to other data stewards who might be able to make any corrections within the data. We have a few different validations that I think we would deem as being a priority for those of you without a grant at this point, which I'll go into a little bit of detail on what these look like. That's going to be the AP not reflected in RCL validation, which is where the fishbone line, where you can see on the right-hand side of the screen, a line feature can be generated from your address points, their corresponding road center lines, based on kind of attribute matching from the addresses to the center lines. That validation will come up as an issue if that fishbone cannot be generated for one reason or another. So that might be an issue of the attributes not matching as they need to between the addresses and their corresponding road center lines. Might be an issue of the address point's address number not being within the address range on the corresponding road center line. Invalid parcel identifiers. This really applies to typical parcels. I know a lot of areas in Indiana maintain parcels for right-of-way coverages and things like that typically do not get state parcel IDs assigned. But that validation will be checking to make sure that the state parcel ID values within the parcel polygon dataset are 18 digits long and do not contain any non-numeric characters. So if you have right-of-ways or things like that are not taxed and don't have those parcel IDs assigned, you can submit those and that validation doesn't need to be worried about. But it might be a good kind of QC check to make sure that there are not bad parcel IDs in any areas of your counties. Parcel ID and taxing code mismatch. That will be checking the first two and the final 3 digits of that 18-digit state parcel ID to make sure that they make a valid unique taxing district code. And then RCL digitized direction. That validation checks the directionality of a given road center line to make sure that it matches the address range order, meaning that a road center line ideally would start where the addresses are lower on the address range and end where the addresses are higher on the address range. And as I mentioned, any work, if you're a data steward yourself, to take a look at these validations and try to correct them is much appreciated. And if you can pass any information on to other data stewards, we appreciate that as well. And I would always be happy to kind of work through what these validation results look like and help train anybody on getting familiarized with VEP and looking through these validations if that resource would be helpful in the future. Really, some of the final content I have is just to go over some next steps for where we're moving with the data harvest. We are working with the State 911 Board and other state agency partners to identify longer-term data development and data maintenance funding options, whether that looks like a longer-term grant. The seed grant was kind of a one-off grant based on some funding that we had available to invest in that. We would like to kind of work to support local government data stewards in Indiana in the future through a permanent funding option if possible, and are trying to make that happen. We are working to refine, based on feedback from IGIC and the broader GIS user community in Indiana, new data standards for 2027 and beyond. These will primarily be aligning the data standards and the data schema that we've been using from version 2 of the NENA Next Generation 911 data model to version 3 of that data model, which was released earlier this year, along with some additional data sets that we are looking to collect at the statewide level that are not part of the Next Gen 911 project. Also continuing to work with the State 911 Board on initial requirements for integrating data for statewide Next Gen 911 call routing. This primarily applies to PSAPs that are utilizing InDigital for their Next Generation 911 core services. For those of you where your PSAP is served by AT&T, you in all likelihood have an ongoing project with AT&T as they've started working with your teams. We have some involvement with AT&T, but are not directly supporting them in their Next Gen 911 efforts at this time. We will work to start looking at cross-jurisdictional data validation. This primarily is focused on boundaries. So again, making sure that those key boundaries do not have any unintentional gaps or overlaps between them, as well as looking at road center lines so that we can start to move forward on more of a kind of routable road network across the state. So making sure that center lines snap to each other where they're supposed or where they should, things like that. And then working to develop workflows and processes to streamline the data collection process and kind of automate things a little bit more so that we can get away from more of a manual data submission process up to the state to something that's we can just grab existing data that's being hosted as a service or something like that. And with that, that is the remaining content that I had to go over today. So if anybody has any questions, I would encourage you to put them in the chat. And I also have some contact information, which I will share on this final slide here. So we have a couple of different email inboxes. That's a good way to get in touch with us. That dataharvest@iot.in.gov is a shared inbox that goes to a couple of members on the GIO team, and is a good way to get in touch with us if you're not sure exactly who to get in touch with. If you need to get in touch with me directly, feel free to email me at mevans@iot.in.gov, and I'll be happy to help as best I can or set up a meeting if there's anything you want to talk about. Also have a couple of QR codes on the screen here, one for the state's, the GIO's website on in.gov, as well as a QR code to subscribe to our monthly newsletter if you're not already subscribed to it. And with that, if there are no questions at this time, I will stick around for a couple of minutes just to make sure nothing comes through. But again, I appreciate everybody making the time to join us today, and I will be sending out the official kickoff emails within the next couple of weeks, probably around mid-June, in advance of the official July 31st start date.